My fellow Americans, let me begin with a simple question. When you pick a fight with the world's second largest economy, are you prepared for the consequences? Not just abroad, but right here at home, because a trade war isn't fought with tanks or missiles. It's fought with tariffs, policy, and strategy. And if you're going to call it a war, you better have a plan to win it. When President Trump stated that trade wars are good and easy to win, the remark echoed confidence, but it also exposed a fundamental misunderstanding of how global economics truly operates. A trade war isn't a campaign rally chant, it's a complex and high-stakes economic conflict that requires strategic thinking and a deep understanding of international markets, supply chains, and diplomatic leverage. Launching a trade war without a carefully laid out plan is like entering a chess match with only checkers strategy. You might make the first move, but you're unlikely to control the board. Successful economic policy demands more than slogans. It requires examining long-term consequences, anticipating retaliation, and preparing safety nets for industries and workers who might be caught in the crossfire. A leader must consider not just the headline of the day, but the ripple effect over months and years. Bravado alone doesn't account for the unintended consequences like job losses in industries dependent on imported materials, rising consumer prices, or farmers losing foreign markets overnight. Moreover, declaring a trade war without building consensus at home and among allies abroad turns a potentially collective effort into a solo gamble. A well-structured strategy includes negotiation, clear goals, timelines, and fallback options. It means using diplomacy as a tool, not abandoning it in favor of short-term confrontation. True leadership recognizes that power isn't about making noise, it's about making progress. And progress, especially in matters as intricate as global trade, comes from doing the hard work, engaging experts, listening to stakeholders, analyzing data, and making deliberate, informed choices. Without that foundation, a trade war becomes a dangerous gamble rather than a calculated effort. That's why entering such a conflict without a real strategy risks doing more harm than good, not just to a rival nation, but to the American people themselves. When tariffs are imposed without a comprehensive plan, the people most immediately affected are often not foreign competitors, but American workers, businesses, and consumers. Tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods, and when those costs rise, companies that rely on foreign materials are forced to pay more to operate. This increase doesn't vanish, it trickles down. Manufacturers pass it on in the form of higher prices for products, while some may slow hiring or even lay off workers to cut costs. The impact is felt throughout the economy, especially in industries already operating on tight margins. Farmers, in particular, often suffer collateral damage in a trade war. When the United States imposes tariffs, targeted countries like China respond in kind, usually hitting U.S. agriculture. American farmers have spent decades building relationships and export markets abroad. A sudden tariff retaliation can close those markets overnight, leaving crops unsold and livelihoods hanging in the balance. Government bailouts may offer temporary relief, but they don't replace the long-term value of stable trade partnerships. At the consumer level, prices for everyday goods, electronics, clothing, appliances, begin to rise. This inflation affects working families the most, shrinking their purchasing power and raising the cost of living. And in a global economy where supply chains span continents, the disruptions from sudden tariff hikes can ripple far and wide, causing uncertainty that slows investment and economic growth. Without a carefully coordinated approach, tariffs become a blunt instrument, more about appearance than impact. The pain they inflict domestically often outweighs the pressure they apply abroad. While the goal of standing up to unfair trade practices is valid, the execution must be measured and intelligent. Otherwise, the trade war becomes self-defeating, hurting the very people it claims to protect and undermining the strength of the U.S. economy from within. China is not an opponent that reacts impulsively or emotionally. It is a calculated, long-term strategist that has spent decades integrating itself into the fabric of the global economy. From advanced manufacturing to rare earth minerals, from technology, supply chains to infrastructure, financing across the developing world, China has positioned itself as a key player in international trade. When provoked with tariffs or aggressive rhetoric, it doesn't simply retaliate with similar measures, it responds in ways that are economically targeted and politically strategic. For example, during the Trump administration's trade war, China didn't just slap tariffs on any American product. It specifically targeted industries that were vital to Trump's voter base, such as agriculture, placing heavy tariffs on soybeans, pork, and other farm goods. This wasn't accidental. It was designed to create domestic pressure inside the United States. China understands the nuances of American politics and leverages them to its advantage. It plays the long game even when the immediate cost is high. Unlike democracies that shift policy every few years, China operates with long-term continuity. Its leadership can endure short-term pain if it means preserving national strategy or gaining leverage over time. They invest heavily in state-owned enterprises, control capital flows, and can coordinate large-scale economic responses far more quickly than Western systems. Furthermore, China seeks to build alternative alliances and trade relationships to cushion itself against U.S. pressure. It has turned to Europe, Africa, and other Asian countries to strengthen trade ties, diversify markets, and reduce dependency on American imports. In doing so, it blunts the effectiveness of unilateral U.S. action, assuming China will yield quickly to U.S. pressure underestimates its economic resilience, its political structure, and its commitment to maintaining global influence. Confronting such a rival without a deep understanding of its strategy is a costly misjudgment. Standing up against unfair trade practices is a responsibility that any strong nation should embrace. When intellectual property is stolen, when markets are manipulated, and when companies face barriers that violate international norms, action must be taken. The principle behind confronting these issues is legitimate, but how that confrontation is handled determines whether it leads to lasting change or unnecessary disruption. Simply applying pressure without a roadmap doesn't correct the imbalance. It often creates new problems while leaving the original ones unresolved. Effective trade enforcement requires more than just punishment. It requires engagement through negotiation, diplomacy, and coordinated efforts with allies. By working with international partners who share similar concerns about China's trade practices, the United States can multiply its leverage. Multilateral pressure is far more difficult for any nation, even one as powerful as China, to ignore or deflect. When America acts alone, it forfeits the strength that comes from unity. Moreover, fair trade must be pursued with consistency. It's not enough to call out one country while turning a blind eye to similar behavior from others because it suits short-term interests. A principled approach strengthens credibility on the world stage and builds trust with both domestic industries and global partners. It sends a message that the U.S. isn't just defending its own economy, but also standing for a rules-based system that benefits all. Trade policy also needs to be aligned with long-term economic goals. If the goal is to reduce dependency on foreign supply chains, then investments in domestic innovation, infrastructure, and education must accompany any confrontational measures. Without these parallel efforts, aggressive trade moves may backfire, leaving American businesses exposed and unprepared. Ultimately, addressing unfair trade isn't about isolation. It's about smart, strategic engagement that advances American interests while upholding the values of fairness, cooperation, and stability. In the realm of global trade, going it alone rarely leads to lasting success. The strength of the United States has always come not just from its economic power, but from the alliances and partnerships it has built around the world. When dealing with a formidable and strategic rival like China, isolating oneself from traditional allies can be a costly mistake. Unity among nations creates a force multiplier. When countries coordinate their trade policies and take a collective stand against unfair practices, the pressure becomes much harder to ignore and the impact much more significant. During the Trump administration's trade war, the decision to impose tariffs not only on China, but also on close allies like Canada and the European Union weakened those critical relationships. Instead of rallying support for a shared cause, it created division and uncertainty. Allies who might have joined the U.S. in pushing back against China's trade abuses were instead caught in the crossfire, leading to retaliatory tariffs and diplomatic tension. This fragmented approach reduced America's leverage and made it easier for China to withstand the pressure. Furthermore, global supply chains are deeply interconnected. Many American companies rely on components and partnerships from multiple countries. A unilateral approach to trade disruption often leads to unintended consequences, where allies and domestic industries both suffer. Cooperation allows for smarter, more targeted strategies that minimize damage and increase effectiveness. Working through international institutions and trade agreements also strengthens enforcement mechanisms. When countries move in sync, they can use existing frameworks to challenge unfair behavior, impose consequences, and ensure accountability in ways that no single nation can achieve alone. In the complex world of global commerce, collaboration is not a sign of weakness. It is a strategic necessity. Building and maintaining alliances is essential if the goal is not just to make noise, but to make meaningful, sustainable progress. True leadership in international affairs isn't measured by how loudly a nation can threaten or how quickly it can escalate conflict. It's measured by the ability to achieve meaningful results without unnecessary harm. Power used wisely is far more effective than power used recklessly. In the context of a trade war, this means resisting the urge to lash out with aggressive policies that may look tough in the short term, but ultimately damage long-term national interests. Starting a trade war without a clear end game is not a demonstration of strength. It's a gamble. Real strength lies in restraint, in knowing when to act and when to listen, and in choosing paths that serve both immediate needs and future stability. Leaders who seek to provoke rather than resolve often create a cycle of retaliation that becomes harder to control as it grows. The economic consequences of such behavior don't stay confined to boardrooms or foreign capitals. They reach American workers, families, and small businesses. Leadership also requires clarity. The American people deserve to understand not just what is being done in their name, but why. They need to see the logic, the purpose, and the measurable goals behind policies that affect their livelihoods. When policies are reactive rather than strategic, when decisions are made based on impulse rather than insight, trust erodes, both at home and abroad. Navigating a complex challenge like global trade demands calm judgment, coalition, building, and long-term vision. These are the hallmarks of real leadership. By approaching conflict with integrity, by choosing thoughtful engagement over hostile confrontation, the United States can protect its interests without sacrificing its values. In doing so, it doesn't just win a trade dispute, it sets a global example of how power and principle can work hand in hand to create lasting progress.